Welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Musicast. I am Dan, and right off the bat, I want to apologize if there's any background noise. We just have some renovators working downstairs, and I have the cats up here with me, and they are not happy to be cooped up, but we're going to forge ahead because this is coming out really late. I'm recording this a couple months into 2023, and I want to talk about 2022. And you can go back and listen to episode 19 about the concerts that I went to in 2021, which was obviously the return to live events year after the bizarro world that was 2020. And I was so happy to get back out there and seeing shows again in 2021, but 2022 was just a level up from there because not only was I able to go to more shows and there were just more tours happening, but with all the updated information about the spread of COVID and all the vaccines, just speaking for myself, I was definitely a lot more comfortable and less anxious about being in crowded spaces than the year before. So that definitely played into the overall vibe. So getting right into it, I wasn't able to see anything in the spring, so my concert season really kicked off in early summer of 2022. And just like last year, because they're my wife's favorite band and they tend to tour in the summer and it's kind of a tradition for her, and I expect it to be one moving forward, we saw Dave Matthews Band again. This is on June 11th, 2022 at the Jiffy Lube Pavilion in Bristow, Virginia. I know I'm really late to the game here, but it was just never part of my youth or adult culture to tailgate. When I went to shows growing up and as an adult, I just wanted to go to the show. But now, after having had my first tailgate experience because we went with some in-laws that are very into tailgating, we made a whole thing of it, and now I really understand why it's such a popular thing to do, because at least for me, I was really happy to have a full stomach walking into a concert and not having to pay venue prices for bottom of the barrel food. So that was a fun new experience. I'm looking forward to doing that again. Another new thing for at least Dave Matthews this time was that we had pit tickets as opposed to seat tickets. So we were closer, and that just enhanced the experience, especially for a band like this, because just like last time, I was just completely floored and blown away by their musicianship, their tightness, the fact that they don't always play all their songs the same every night, and they can jam the way they do, but keep it so tight and in sync as if they had practiced it that way for years. It really is quite something to behold. But yeah, they were solid. They were super fun. They played a few songs that they didn't play last time that I was hoping to hear. One of them being Don't Drink the Water, which has a great groove. But unlike the recording, and I think that's just one of the best things about live music, is getting to see musicians playing stuff after however amount of time has gone by since they recorded it and seeing what headspace they're in to play it live at any given time. I definitely appreciate also seeing live music that sounds just like the recording. That's not an easy feat to pull off either, unless you're just playing the record over the PA. But more so, I just really love the idea of a recording just being a snapshot of the time that it was recorded at, but songs and art in general being something that can continue to kind of grow and evolve with us as we grow and change. I think that's why a lot of artists don't like to play stuff from their past, especially people that record stuff really young. Like when I saw Silverchair, which you can hear more about in an upcoming episode where I'm going to do the same kind of format that I did in episode 22, where I reflect on concerts from my past. These will be the ones that after college, and one of them was Silverchair. And the only time I got to see Silverchair was really late in the game. They were much older than they had been when, they were at their mainstream peak in the 90s, and they only played like one or two songs from that era. And then, I think of bands like Paramore don't want to play Misery Business. And I mean, heck, when I saw Soulfly in 2014, they only played like two songs off of any of their 90s or early 2000s output. Oh, Weezer was another one of those too. I remember after I was glad to have got to see them in the late 90s and early 2000s when they didn't have like a dozen more records of stuff to pull from live. They were just about to or had just put out the Green album, which again you can hear more about in episode 22. But they actually played stuff off of Pinkerton back then, and I've heard moving forward that they don't want to play that stuff anymore, which is a bummer because that's some of their most engaging material in my estimation. And I get it. If you're playing the same songs, thousands of times, night after night after night, you want to play the newer stuff, the stuff you're more excited about. But like I said, I think there can be different ways to approach it. You can still give the fans that nostalgia that they want without having to compromise your own integrity as an artist and play things that you don't want to play. There is definitely something to be said about an artist still being in charge of their own art. Even though our interpretation and experience of their output is our own, it's still their creation. So they can do whatever they want with it, for better or for worse. You can hear me rant about that kind of thing more when it comes to media output on my Musicast side of this podcast. But anyway, a perfect example of still playing music from the past that people want to hear without having to just churn it out in a rote, unfeeling kind of way. If that's even why bands don't play stuff, I'm just generalizing here. But when I saw Head PE back in 2012, which you can hear more about on episode 12 of Musicast, they played several songs in a different style than they were originally recorded. And I love that. I thought that was so cool and unexpected to hear certain songs, that were like new metal rap rock songs, essentially, that they played like in a reggae style or played something more funk. I'm sure that made it more kind of fresh and fun for them, and it was totally unexpectedly awesome and fresh and fun for me and the audience too. So anyway, back to Dave Matthews Band. I just noticed that on the recording of their song Don't Drink the Water, the guitar isn't necessarily, like a lot of their songs, is more of just one of the layers of instruments. One thing I've noticed about them, listening to them with my wife and going to their concerts, is they often don't tend to prioritize or focus on one instrument over another unless they're doing more of like a solo jam. But that's why I just don't categorize them as a rock band necessarily, even though they were part of like the alt-rock scene, whether intentionally or not, back in the 90s. But they don't really emphasize guitar, especially electric guitar, as much as the balance of all the instruments when it comes to how they kind of like mix and engineer their sound. But live, and I don't know that much about them individually or their history or anything, but I'm told by my wife that their electric guitar player, Tim, was a later addition. So that also speaks to the fact that they're like evolving, and adjusting their live sound as they go along. They're not just sticking to whatever they did on the recording originally. And there was some pretty aggressive and frankly kind of heavy palm muting on Don't Drink the Water, which I thought was really appropriate because that song is a really interesting structure that kind of builds on itself. And by the time Tim came in, like with his palm muting part, I was getting some serious rock vibes. So it's nice to know that they allow themselves to kind of do what's best for a song in a certain circumstance, as opposed to handicap themselves, like take advantage of what they have available. So if they add a new musician, they give that instrument a chance to shine. So that was really cool to see. On June 28th, 2022, after 20 years of waiting, I finally got to see Garbage again at the National in Richmond, Virginia. And I can't tell you how excited I was for this because Garbage has been one of my favorite bands since the 90s. I've definitely kind of fallen off with them after their extended hiatus, after they put out Bleed Like Me. But from the beginning, they really helped expand my palette for what was possible with alt-rock, where it could still rock, still have those thick guitars and heavy percussion, but also integrate lots of different sounds and styles from a lot of different kinds of instrumentation. Garbage really carried the torch for how creative alt-rock could be to me for decades. And it wasn't like I didn't like the stuff that I heard when they came back in the 2010s, but I just didn't feel like it was as strong as what I was used to, so I just didn't really put it on constant rotation. But either way, I was really excited to see them no matter what they were going to play. And apparently this was their first headlining show in 3 years. So Shirley said it took her some time to kind of get used to being like the front woman and feeling confident on stage again and stuff, which is so crazy to think that this band that's been doing this for decades. But I guess everybody has their own kind of comfort level with things, no matter how experienced they are with them. And I know that we're all our own worst enemies. And later you'll hear me talk about Florence and the Machine, and she had a very similar sentiment. I think COVID too really kind of threw a lot of performers through a loop that at the time indefinitely shut everything down, and nobody was sure if and when we'd be gathering again and touring. So I'm sure that shook up some confidence for sure. But regardless, Shirley was as amazing as ever. She's so charismatic. She's like funny and witty. super irreverent. It's like nothing was sacred, and I love that. She seemed really genuine and honest. Like her banter didn't feel, scripted or rehearsed like sometimes it does with touring bands. It seemed really off the cuff, and she seemed like she was really having a lot of fun kind of getting her mojo back. She was very fired up about like political strife, like the war in Ukraine and everything, and a lot of the other injustices going on in the world. And as she reminded us a few times, even at 55, she rocked so hard. She was like dancing and swinging the mic around. She just sounded incredible. And like I was talking about before with Dave Matthews, they didn't play everything exactly like it is on the record. They toyed around with their intros and like arrangements of the songs. They didn't structure everything exactly the same way. I really loved how they played special acoustic for like the first third or so, and then it built up into the song that we expected. That was really cool. And Shirley really made it a point to give props to their influences and inspirations. But instead of playing just straight up cover songs by themselves, they incorporated them into their other songs. So like they integrated part of Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus into Wicked Ways, which I love that song. I was so happy to hear that live. And sort of like an outro of You Look So Fine was Fleetwood Mac's Dreams. And I was so excited to hear, I've always wanted to hear Can't Cry These Tears live. And allegedly, she said that that was the first time they've ever played it live, which I find kind of crazy because it's such an iconic song. To me, anyway. It's so unique for them. It's so big and bombastic. I can't believe they've never played it live, but that was quite a privilege. And I don't remember it hitting me like it did when I saw Garbage 20 years ago in Philly when they were touring off of Beautiful Garbage. But I was really in awe of seeing, all the musicians in the band are legends. But watching Butch Vig, the guy that produced stuff like Nevermind, it just really hit me, like watching him and the rest of them. These people are legends, and it just gave me chills. And it only made it that much more awesome to see them because they all seem really genuinely appreciative to be there. Even though Shirley made all the band members come up to the mic and say something to the crowd, even though a couple of them didn't want to. But they all seemed like they were having a great time. And even Butch Vig came up to the mic on his own afterwards to thank everybody for coming out and still supporting them, which is crazy to me with a career that they've all had, that they would think that people wouldn't come out in droves to see them. I don't remember from when I saw them 20 years ago if it was the same, but I thought it was really interesting that Butch Vig had a mixture of electric and acoustic drums, that like his cymbals and some of the shells were electric, but he also had some acoustic shells, and I think that just really is such a garbage thing to do, and it gave me some ideas about possibly incorporating some stuff in my playing in the future. And I gotta say, hearing their newer material played live really helped me appreciate it more. I experienced that a lot with a lot of bands where I'm not really sure how I feel about some music they put out, but then I see them live and it just makes me appreciate the recordings that much more. I'm sure a lot of people have that similar kind of experience. So I've definitely been rocking out to their later albums too since. And I don't remember their name now, but apparently the opening act, which I think was just a singer and a guitar player and keyboardist, were discovered by Shirley on Instagram somehow. I guess they had messaged her or tagged her a lot until she decided to take them on the road. So that was cool. But I couldn't help but think about Michael Cera's band in Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist with the drum machine, because their absence of a drummer I just thought was really conspicuous.
You know, if you don't have a drummer, then why do you have drums?
Seen Dirty Heads again, which was at the Virginia Credit Union Live in Richmond, Virginia Raceway on July 12th, 2022. I had my big rock star moment for the first time at this show because somebody recognized me as a member of my band, After We Pray, which is afterwepraey.com. And that was really exciting and humbling because I don't think anybody's ever been like, hey, are you that guy from that band before? In terms of the opening acts, I heard from a distance, but I didn't get to see Article Sound System because we were in a super long merch line, but they sounded good. And then Tribal Seeds was up next, and they were great, solid reggae. Somebody mentioned later that that wasn't their usual singer that played at our show, but I'm not familiar with them or the lineup before having seen them, so I didn't know. Either way, they sounded good. And then Soja was a band that I've heard about for a long time, especially because I think they're from this general region, Northern Virginia maybe. But they were obviously having like a great time. I really liked they had a small brass and woodwind section that were, synced up with their dances and everything. They also had a really good positive message and vibe. But seeing Dirty Heads again and seeing them again as a headliner, it's just really obvious why they are a headlining act over the other bands that opened for them, because as good as all those other bands were, Dirty Heads they have it. Sometimes it's hard to really articulate and put into words, but they have that thing that makes them stand out. I think part of it is that they don't really stick to any one genre. Like I've mentioned before, they kind of are their own genre. I think they pull from a lot of influences and they make their own unique sound out of that. The other bands, again, were really good, but they were like reggae, and that's great. But it's not as versatile and not as far-reaching as the Dirty Heads are. And their just sound on the records and live is so big and full, but especially live, they have such a great stage presence. And in addition to that, they also had some fun stage setup stuff. One of them wasn't working. They had an inflatable Kraken tentacle setup. They had one on one side, and the other one just kind of flopped around for a second, and then they gave up on it. And just a few days later, totally unexpectedly, I finally got to see The Pretty Reckless. So I was in Baltimore, where I grew up, partially. And as I've talked about many, many times, and you can hear much more about on episode 13 of this podcast, my dad is a classical French horn player. He was playing with the Baltimore Symphony, who were playing along with Toy Story. This is a thing that Symphony's been doing to try to stay relevant, is they play the soundtrack live with a movie playing at a symphony hall. And I know my dad's done like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that over the years. We took my son to go see Toy Story while I was up visiting them. And I was just scrolling through Instagram during intermission, and I saw that The Pretty Reckless was playing in Baltimore that same night, and I had no idea. I mean, it was actually a Hailstorm headlining act, but I had never heard them, so, I went to see The Pretty Reckless. And it was funny because we were already downtown Baltimore at the Meyerhoff Symphony Hall to see Toy Story, so we were already there, so I just had my parents drop me off at the Pier 6 venue. It's funny, I never went there. I grew up in that town, especially during my formative middle school, high school years of going to concerts constantly. And for some reason, I never saw something at Pier 6. So all these years later, I finally got to go to Pier 6. But yeah, I just felt like a kid again, being in the big city, being dropped off by my parents. I went and got a burger and waited for the show to start. The opening acts were Lilith Czar. Unfortunately, I only got in there on time to see her last song, but she rocked. And I'm surprised I had never heard of her before. Maybe I had and I didn't realize it, but I've looked her stuff up since, and she's great. And it was awesome, too, that there was a female drummer. You don't see that enough, and I was really glad to see that. But then the next band was another band that I had never heard of, but now I'm glad I have. And they actually came through Richmond on a headlining tour, but I wasn't able to go to. Played at a club that I've played at many times with my band, After We Pray, afterwepraey.com, at the Canal Club. And this is The Warning, which I found out later are three sisters from Mexico, I believe, or somewhere in Central South America. But man, they were awesome too. Like good, solid rock and roll, metal-ish rock and roll. The drummer sang too, so they were singing 3-part harmonies. And I guess the one way they got more discovered, and I've heard it on Sirius XM since, is their Enter Sandman cover that they did, which for somebody who is a huge Metallica fan, but I never want to hear that darn song again in my entire life, I didn't mind their cover of it. It was different enough, but captured the essence of it. It was pretty cool. That was a couple opening band surprises that were really cool. Okay, so finally I got to see The Pretty Reckless. I discovered them more than a decade ago, before I had a kid, before I lived in this area. I met a musician friend of a friend who was really into them, and I think they hadn't even put out their first album yet, but they had some stuff on YouTube I remember watching. She showed me some of their acoustic versions of their stuff, and I thought it was really good. And then I learned that Taylor Momsen was the girl from The Grinch, and I guess Gossip Girl, but I never watched that. So, that was interesting. I thought maybe it was a little bit of a gimmick. An actor wants to be a rock star. Okay. But I was really interested in the fact that she wanted specifically to do such hard rock. Because a lot of times, you see actors that want to get into music, they often do pop music, or they're like a pop artist that wants to become an actor or something like that. Of course, and then rappers always seem to want to act. But you don't see a lot of people going into that, specific brand of hard rock or metal. So that piqued my interest. But when their first album, Light Me Up, came out, I was just absolutely in love with that band because they had such a unique vision, and songs like Zombie and Make Me Wanna Die and You were so captivating and enthralling that I knew that I had found like a new, favorite-ish band. And then over the years, their other stuff came out, and I liked it just as much. The Who You Sellin' For album had to grow on me a little bit, especially with its more jam-ish kind of nature, but definitely grew on me. So I really liked their output, but I, for some reason, just never got to see them. I know they came around a few times, and I just wasn't able to make it or whatever. So I was just really excited for this totally serendipitous opportunity to do so. And yeah, it was everything that I hoped and dreamed. They were just epic on stage. They had a huge presence. Another example of, like I just said with Dirty Heads, they're just one of those, like, I can see why they are a headliner kind of band. Taylor is just as powerful as a vocalist, but also as a frontwoman live as she is on the album. She really owned that stage, just like I expected her to, but all of my expectations were surpassed. So they played mostly stuff from their latest album, Death by Rock and Roll, especially makes sense because it came out during the pandemic, so they weren't able to tour on it right away. But they did play a good mix of stuff off their other albums too. And Taylor just sang for the whole set, except at the end she grabbed the guitar for Take Me Down. So that was cool to see her get to rock out even more at the end of the set. But unfortunately they didn't get to play as long as I would have liked them to because they weren't the headliners. Hailstorm was. I don't think I'd ever heard them. I heard of them. I wasn't able to stay because my parents had to come pick me up. But honestly, having looked them up afterwards, no shade on them or anything, but they're just not for me. I'm glad I didn't stay for them. So even though they were headlining, this was really a pretty reckless show to me. Then at the end of July, on the 30th, at the Meadow Event Park After Hours field that's near Kings Dominion in Virginia, I got to see Incubus again. So I had a couple fun carryovers from last summer. The big difference of seeing Incubus this summer, though, was that we took the whole family. We took the kids, and we also met up with some other family members and their young infant. And if you heard episode 19 about the 2021 run of concerts, Incubus had to change their venue from inside to outside at the last minute, I guess because of the pandemic stuff. So they were in a much bigger venue than they had sold tickets for, so it seemed actually like a small crowd. I mean, there were a lot of people there, but not in regards to the venue size. But this time they were playing at a much bigger venue outside, but it was also really well attended. So that was nice to know that Incubus, hadn't lost their attendance draw. And honestly, I didn't know that Incubus is still that mainstream. I mean, the crowd definitely skewed more elder millennial or what have you, like my generation. And there were a lot of people there with their younger kids and stuff like us. But it was good to see either way that Incubus could still draw a crowd that big in 2022. So the first band was a band called the Aquadolls, and we heard them while waiting in the long metal detector line. And I wish I had to actually got to see them up close because they sounded pretty good, but can't go faster than the person in front of you. We heard them cover the Go-Go's Vacation. And then on our way in, when we finally got through the line, I saw the singer hanging by their merch table, and she seemed really sweet. She had like a little girl getting an autograph and taking a picture by her parents. She seemed really excited, and I don't know, I just love that kind of stuff. When you see the younger generations getting into this kind of music and the musicians being so gracious, it's the kind of stuff that has kept me in these scenes all this time. And then just like last summer, I got to see Sublime with Rome. It's funny that I got to see Sublime with Rome and Dirty Heads together in 2021, and then in 2022 I saw them on two separate tours. So, it was fun, full circle. And as always, now that I've seen them a few times, I can say they were just as solid and sublimey as you'd expect. They were great. They played all the expected Sublime hits, but they also played a couple originals like Wicked Heart and Panic, so that was nice to hear. I'm not like over the moon for their post-Bradley output, but it's good, it's solid, and I don't think it gets enough credit, or at least gets overshadowed, of course, by the mainstream popularity and nostalgia for the Bradley years, but they're still a good, like, active band. And I just really, really love Rome's positive, gracious attitude. He mentioned having grown up listening to Sublime and Incubus when he was on stage, and he said that he just doesn't take this for granted. He gets to tour around the world and play these songs that he grew up loving and idolizing, and he's just really grateful for that, and I love that kind of stuff. So since it was a bigger venue and we had the kids with us, we were much farther away from the stage than we had been when it was just my wife and myself in 2021 when we saw them in Raleigh. And I was, I was a little bit like, oh, kind of wish we were closer. But at the same time, they were so good. I remember had seen them at Ozfest and in a couple arenas, which you can hear more about on episode 22 of this podcast. But I never really felt like their music really lent itself to these huge venues. But after seeing them this time, I kind of take that back, especially Brandon, but all of them, like they're so epic, for lack of a better term. Their music is actually pretty big. It's intimate, especially because Brandon is such a powerful singer, but they have such a big sound too because of how amazing the drummer is. And Mike Eisinger, he has this huge sound. So just like the year before, they started the set with Morning View songs. They played the first 3 songs off of Morning View. So I thought maybe they were going to kind of do what they did the year before, but then they changed things up completely and they played some really unexpected things. For instance, they played the song Mexico acoustically with just Mike and Brandon. They played Echo, which I've always wanted to hear live, and that was awesome and lovely. They played some Motown cover. I know the song, but I can't think of who originally did it or what the song is, but I did recognize it, I swear. And last year they played In the Company of Wolves. So seeing them 2 years in a row with my wife, who is equally or maybe even more of an Incubus fan than me, if possible. Her 2 favorite songs are In the Company of Wolves and Mexico. So getting to see that for her was a really big deal. And I was really happy that got to happen for her. But for me, my big highlight, the thing that I have wanted ever since I saw them open for Korn at the first Family Values tour in 1998, on Halloween, before I knew their music, when they were touring off of Science, which later became and still is my favorite album of theirs. I have never seen them play anything off of Science since then, but they played Vitamin complete with the hand drum, like DJ part with Brandon with his hand drum. And man, that just blew me away. I was so happy. I wish they would have just played the whole album, but even one song just really made my heart swell. And even though they really do nail the way that they play stuff live to how it was recorded, I loved how they just did like little subtle things here and there, especially things that weren't on the recording that like Mike would do. He would do like a palm muted build on a bridge as opposed to how it would be in the recording, which had like more layers to it, I guess. There were certain like transitions in songs where they would emphasize the bass over the guitar than how it was recorded. So kind of like I was saying before, they definitely played stuff, more or less like it was originally recorded to sound, but they would change up little things here and there. It was kind of like, the little Easter egg fan service kind of stuff in a movie where if you're not really paying attention, you don't know what you're looking for, it might just go by you. But for somebody that's, consumed these songs for decades now and knows all the little ins and outs and sounds and transitions, it was just cool to see that they were keeping things fresh still. I appreciate that. And they played for almost 2 solid hours, which, these days, a lot of shows have been going to, sometimes a headlining band will play for like 45 minutes. And, it was nice to see Incubus really give it their all. They really seem to be having a great time. So the next show I was supposed to go to that I had tickets to at the end of August, on August 26th, 2022, at a place that I haven't been to yet, but I keep seeing bands on touring lists coming through, called Elevation 27 in Virginia Beach. It was supposed to be Stabbing Westward, and I was so stoked to see that. Because if you go back and listen, how many times am I going to plug this? Episode 22 about concerts from my past. I only got to see Stabbing Westward once before they broke up originally in 2001 at the HF Festival. And they only played like 6 songs, and they were touring off of their much derided, even by the band, their self-titled album, which I think is a great album still, but it's definitely not a great Stabbing Westward album. I think it's just a good album overall. I just really, really wanted to see them, and they broke up, and I was always sad about that. Now they're back together. They put out a phenomenal new album, and then Chris Hall, poor guy, gets throat cancer. And it's awful. And, and I felt so bad and selfish to be like, oh, but now I don't get to see Stabbing Westward. But I mean, Chris, whatever he needed to do to recover was vastly more important than anybody getting to see them and fulfill their nostalgia for the band and everything. But apparently the prognosis was really good, and I think they're already back on tour. So hopefully I get to see them again at some point in the future. But yeah, that show was canceled because of Chris's cancer, and all the best to him. And I just hope everything really went well with that for him and his family. But the next show I did get to go to, speaking of family, was Florence and the Machine on September 12th, 2022 at the Capital One Arena in DC. And this is another one of my wife's all-time favorite musicians, but also our daughter's. So we took her. I really didn't know what to expect. You know, Florence is a really interesting anomaly to me. She's got much more of like a, I don't know, Tori Amos, kind of bigger than life solo artist kind of thing. It's really hard to categorize her music, really wrap my head around exactly like how somebody could have a vision about making music like that. I think her music is amazing, but she's also been just a really unique fascination as a musician and as a music fan. Like, what is this? You know, I hear her music and I'm like, it harkens of lots of different things, everything from like classical music to like lighter rock to jazz and singer-songwriter and everything in between. Can't wrap my head around exactly what it is. Just shows the completely useless but obsessive desire for people like me to categorize everything to understand it, which isn't necessary at all. But again, I didn't really know what to expect because I, had never seen her live, and listening to her music with all the different instrumentation, it's so varied and vast. I didn't know how they were going to pull all that off on stage. I also know that she's very aesthetically minded and has a whole kind of culture there with her like look and feel and the atmosphere to the music. I got to say, this is one of the most communal, positive vibes that I got from a crowd attending a show since I saw, I don't know, like maybe Rage Against the Machine back in when they were doing their final tours off of Battle of Los Angeles, where it just felt like a community because people were all dressed up and everybody had a huge smile on their face. Everybody was so excited. The energy, the electricity was palpable. Just walking around, everybody was so excited to see Florence, and I was totally swept up in it. I loved how, maybe one reason I was really comfortable with it was because it really reminded me of a similar vibe to the Renaissance Fair, even though it wasn't that at all. But there was a lot of big personality and kind of serious silliness coming out of the big flowy dresses and the people wearing capes and very flamboyant, like bigger than life kind of outfits and those flower headdresses and stuff, and lots of big makeup. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people that like Florence also attend Renaissance fairs, which I don't know if I've ever specifically mentioned on here, but I worked at the Maryland Renaissance Fair as a teen and fell in love with it and have been attending ever since. And because of all that positivity, I don't want to bring that down at all, but I really didn't like the opening act, which I found out later was somebody that is friends with Florence, and Florence really wanted to bring on tour to support and everything. I think that's all great, but just on a purely like visceral level, it was this avant-garde kind of hip-hop act that did not work for me at all. And I did go back and to listen to the music to see if if it's just maybe a live issue or something, but yeah, I just wasn't my thing. But people seem to enjoy it, so I'm glad that they did. But for Florence, oh my God, what an incredible performer. In all the years that I've been going to shows and I've been, fawning over all the acts that I've seen for all the different reasons, there's a few that really stand out as like above the fray, so to speak. And that is when I saw Rage Against the Machine and Nine Inch Nails, which you can hear on, I'm doing it again, on episode 22. There was just something about something that really made those performers stand out, in a big way. There's a reason that they are massively well known and everything. And Florence is right up there with them to me because she just had it. She had everything, the atmosphere, the energy, the vibe, this huge stage creation. It looked like this like crystalline, some kind of like Narnia wintry altar, stalactites coming from like this like crystal cave, and a screen that would come down that she would dance behind in silhouette. And she had a big flowy dress on that she's well known for, and she was just like dancing around, like just totally free. And she was very like prancy too. She like jumped and skipped all over the stage. She was barefoot the whole time. I don't know if I've ever seen that before, but it just really worked. I mean, she was almost like some kind of fairy just flitting about the stage. But her voice, you hear people on recordings and they have layered, they have harmonies, they have compression, they're processed, sometimes there's auto-tune. I'm like, okay, are they going to be able to pull this off live? In terms of the musicianship, I'll get to that in a second, and that only enhanced everything, but it could have just been her by herself and it still would have been just as epic because she could sing and she nailed stuff on the record that I was like, how are you going to pull that off live? Holding certain notes out. She has quite a range, so she could sing just incredibly powerfully, and that just blew me away. But then she'd also add in, as she was singing, like all these very dramatic, almost like silent film actor gestures. She would like fall to the floor on her knees with her hand on her head, like, oh goodness, what shall happen to me kind of stuff. And oh man, it was just so captivating. But with her band, so there was at least 6 people that were backup musicians, including a singer, but who also played a violin and a tambourine and acoustic guitar. And then there was a percussionist, and there was a guitar player that played a few other instruments as well. So they had a really interesting answer to my question of like, how are they going to pull all this instrumentation off from her records live? Well, the answer is you get multi-instrumentalists that can do a lot of different things depending on what the song calls for. They were almost show stealers in themselves, because just as a musician, like watching them, I was like, oh, okay, so you're gonna go from piano to harp to guitar. Wow. And Florence was also really, really interactive with the crowd. She was very talkative and really adorable, seemed very self-aware, and would like call attention to awkwardness of things, but also, she had so much gratitude and positive energy to give, and she was often down in the front walkway, between the stage and the barrier, where she would be singing into fans' faces and holding hands and all that kind of stuff. And at one point she stopped during an intro of a song because she thought someone needed some help in the front. At another point, she got everybody to put away their phones, allegedly. She tried to get everybody to put away their phones, and made a point about sharing a collective moment together, just for what we had, in that moment, as opposed to sharing these moments online. And that was really nice. And yeah, that's just gonna go down in the books as one of the most memorable shows that I've ever been to. And then in October, for the first time so far, I got to finally see Cab For Cutie back at that Virginia Credit Union Live Raceway area in Richmond. That was October 6th, 2022. And I had heard about Cab way back, like when they were first making waves when I was in college, and emo was really big movement while I was in college, especially at an art school in an East Coast city. So I remember hearing people talk about Cab all the time, but I don't really think I gave them the time of day back then or for years later. I was given an album of theirs by a friend a few years after college, and I generally liked it, but it was the Postal Service that really got my attention, actually. So I think I had gotten the Postal Service from the same friend at some point. I was just as surprised as anyone that I got into the Postal Service more than Cab, because I typically do not like electronic music without guitar. What really often draws me to music and why I like rock so much, even though I'm a drummer, it's the guitar and the vocals and the interplay between that and the expression that comes from that. So things being synthesized, keyboards and DJs and that kind of stuff, if it's more of an accompaniment, like in Reggie the Full Effect, I love that. But if it's the main source of melody aside from the vocals, I'm usually not a big fan. That's why I don't like techno and things either. There's a lot of other reasons too, around like structure and repetitiveness and redundancy and things, but also the music itself just doesn't like hit me the way that guitar-driven music does. So you would think that between the two, I would like Cab more, but I was kind of ambivalent when I finally heard some Cab. But the Postal Service, which I tried to convince myself I didn't like it at first, but I remember I kept wanting to listen to it after I heard it a couple times, and I just listened to that album over and over again until I was like, all right, fine, I love this. Can't really even say why. It's just so good, so catchy, and so relatable, and that kind of stuff. So that did help build my appreciation for Cab. I never really got like super into, I wouldn't say I was like a big Cab fan. I just was more aware of them and I knew some of their songs. My band, when we would play like an acoustic gig, like at a farmer's market or something, we would play Follow You Into the Dark. And I think that's just one of those songs that, transcends any kind of hang-ups that people like me have about it being associated with whatever band. I think it's just an amazing song. So then when I met my wife, though, she likes Death Cab a lot, so I started listening to them more. And I definitely started appreciating them more, especially for how unique they really are when it comes to like that kind of brand of emo indie, not heavy, not really even edgy kind of rock. I think they do it better than most. And there is a side to it that I didn't quite recognize at first, how not cynical, but there is a real kind of subtle darkness to especially some of the lyrics. So I appreciate that kind of subversiveness, like in some of Brand New's music too, where it sounds like it's meant to be conveying something on the surface because of the qualities of the type of music that they're playing and the way it sounds. But then when you actually listen to what it's about, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like what they should be talking about. So yeah, that made me appreciate it more too, that kind of subversion. But I really didn't know what to expect going into them live. I honestly thought maybe that might be a little boring because they're not really big rockers. It's more subtle kind of rock music. But I'm totally happy and grateful to say that they were great live. They were really fun. They sounded great. They sounded really big and full. The singer, he was so cute. His way of kind of like dancing and grooving to the music, he just seemed like he was having such a great time. I wasn't sure, I thought maybe that might be kind of mopey and subdued, but no, they were very energetic and fun. It felt like a rock show, even though I didn't think it was going to be. I thought it'd be more of like a, like an indie kind of shoegazy, emo-ish kind of feel, but they sounded upbeat and fun. They had a great light show. I was really surprised about lots of fun stuff going on there. The percussion was also awesome. The drummer, I don't really follow stuff where people talk about Death Cab very much, so I'm not really aware of what the chatter is about them, but I could see them being underrated as musicians because, they're not shredding and they're not like doing huge solos and stuff, but like their drummer was really good and really interesting kind of stuff that he was doing. For instance, one song he played partially with a shaker, but then he would just use the shaker as a stick on his acoustic drums. And I thought that was kind of fun because I don't think I'd seen something quite like that before. I've seen people grab a shaker and play it and then set it down and grab a stick, but he just used it as a stick. And the singer, he was really funny too. He told a story about a place that I've heard about from people that have lived in this area in Richmond, Virginia for a long time. They talk about this venue / restaurant, I guess, called Chopsticks with an X that doesn't exist anymore, apparently, but was, I don't know, like an old rock or hardcore club or something back in the day. He told one of their like earliest or their first experience playing in Richmond was 20 years ago or whatever at this place Chopsticks, and asking somebody for a place to crash, and he said he'll never forget that it was the dirtiest place that they ever crashed at back in their van days or whatever. So hey, at least he remembers Richmond for something. He also made a joke about the crowd being so polite that, he said the security weren't earning any money that night because they weren't really necessary because everybody was just way too nice. He also made a joke about when they sang Follow You Into the Dark, he sang it solo and he made us sing the howl part of the song, and he said that like the next day people would ask about how was the show last night, and it'd be like, well, the a-hole singer made us howl at him. So it was cute, it's funny. And I noticed that their keyboardists also play guitar sometimes too, and that the bass and lead guitarists had their own keyboards. So there was a lot of like interesting mix it up musicianship going on. And also the guitarists rotated their electric and acoustic guitars depending on the song. So very versatile. I'm really happy and excited to say that I'm going to this Death Cab / Postal Service tour that's coming up, I think next fall, sometime in 2023. I'm really excited to get to see Postal Service anyway, but now that I've seen Death Cab live, I'm excited to see them again. So that's something to look forward to. Only a few days later, on October 10th, 2022, I got to see the one and only, the Queen, Demi Lovato, at the Anthem in DC, which is a newer club, and I've heard about it, but I haven't got to go because it wasn't there when I was growing up in that area. Man, that place was nice. I wish that was there when I was a kid. I mean, I loved the 930 Club and the other places that I went to, like in Philly where I went to college, and all these like dirty, dank, grimy clubs and bars and like little venues and stuff that I, saw all these bands at. But the Anthem was just pristine, and it was huge. It was such a great venue. It was really nice, and it was down on the water, and we got dinner beforehand. It was like some Asian, you go in and there's like a touchscreen kiosk. There's no person that you order from, and they give you your bowl of whatever I got. It was some kind of like coconut salad. It was really good. And the whole thing, it just felt really like everything was so fancy and modern. I felt like maybe I was in Tokyo as opposed to DC. I don't know. Because the DC that I knew growing up, at least the DC that I saw shows in the areas that I went to, was not like that. So Demi Lovato's a name I've known for forever. I knew she was an actress turned pop singer or whatever. And I knew some of her hits like Sorry Not Sorry and Cool for the Summer, and I'll do an episode on pop music at some point. I do like pop music in general. I'm not like anti-pop or anything just for the virtue of it being pop, but Demi definitely fell into that category for me of kind of the Christina Aguilera, Pink, the kind of artists that I knew were really, really talented, but they're stuck in the trappings of their own genre, where I feel like there's a lot more they could do, they have a lot more to offer. And speaking of Pink, I'm going to see her this year in 2023, and she is one of those people that has branched out, has done other things, like more rock tinged stuff, and I think that's exactly the kind of thing that a lot of these pop artists could do more of, is dabble in other genres, because things get to me so repetitive and boring when it's just the same synthesized club beat or whatever, with obviously super talented singer just singing up and down scales. It's just kind of showy and missing like an emotionality, even if it's really like big operatic ballady kind of material. It's one thing that I just don't care about, like Adele. And Demi's like earlier stuff, for the most part, the way it came across to me was just so traditionally and cliche pop music, even though it's good, but I just didn't really connect with it very well. And this all happened in a short amount of time, but I think like sometime in the few months preceding this show, I heard from one of my YouTubers that I watch, Finn McKenty, was doing a reaction to or a review of her new album, Holy Bleep. And I didn't even know, because I don't follow Demi Lovato specifically. So I had no idea that she had like renounced pop and was going to start a rock career and like had, changed her aesthetic and all this stuff. I just wasn't aware of all this. It all kind of hit me all at once that this pop star that I was vaguely familiar with was switching to rock and put out a rock album. And the album like had just come out. So I was able to hear the review of it, and here's all this positive talk about not just the quality of the music, but also the meaningfulness behind the lyrics and like the experiences that Demi had had as a young star, and how she was pouring that back into the music, and she really wanted the music to reflect the angst and anger and sadness and desperation, and also like the empowerment that she had gone through with going through things like rehab and getting sober and stuff like that, and overcoming a lot of her demons or dealing with her demons. So obviously that just really got my interest, piqued, and then I went and listened to the album, and I was like, this is it. This is exactly what I want out of music, is edgy, intense, raw realness, and everything that I want out of like good hard rock, which I'm usually not much of a fan of, just like hard rock. I like obviously more metal tinged kind of stuff, or things that are all in on the edginess as opposed to skirting around it. But this is like the perfect peak example of all that stuff coming together for a fan like me. I was just immediately in love with this album, then stoked to find out almost immediately after hearing the album that she was touring. So grabbed up some tickets, and then I discovered that another act that was opening for her, Royal and the Serpent, somebody that I'd heard on the Alt Nation Sirius XM channel, but I'd only heard that one song, Overwhelmed, which wasn't really rocky, was more kind of indie synthesized kind of stuff, so I didn't really think much of it. But then I went and listened to more of her stuff to prepare for the show, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really interesting. There's a real edge here, and there's a lot of varied kind of sounds and toying around with different genres and stuff. It wasn't as like indie as I thought it would be, or indie alt or whatever. So I was excited to see her too, and I wasn't disappointed. She was awesome. Royal and the Serpent, she was very like zany and energetic. She reminded me a lot of Amy Echo of the Start and Human Waste Project fame. Just had that kind of like stage vibe of being quirky, kind of unhinged, and with all the rats imagery that was on the merch and stuff. But the way she had things set up, it was her on guitar and then another guitarist and a drummer. So there was no bass player. They did have backing tracks though, so it didn't sound like empty or anything unfull. Man, the drummer was a wild animal too. He was a lot of fun to watch. And she did her own drum solo too. That was cool to see her talented in multiple areas. And she mentioned how she was a fan of Demi's as a kid, and this was a dream come true for her to be able to open up for her and everything. And I'm like, man, just so much like positive vibes, from the shows I saw last year. I think a lot of us were reacting to the post-pandemic era of like really being more aware and grateful for having these opportunities because they can get easily taken away. So yeah, they were great. A lot of fun. I think they were more current with the younger crowd that was there. There seemed to be a pretty young crowd in general. They're college age or younger, so it's cool that like Demi is still relevant with that age group, but also I'm sure that Roller and the Serpent played a part in that draw. Then little Demi comes out on stage, and I didn't realize how short she actually was in person. They had a big silhouette of a cross behind a sheet that covered the stage that fell when she came out. That was a fun opening, and again, she was like so tiny but such a huge presence on stage. Kind of like Taylor Momsen, who's, really not a very imposing looking person, but just their whole vibe. Demi obviously was destined to be a rock star. She was just killing it. She played a lot of rhythm guitar. She was so charismatic, really, really funny, really good, like connecting with the crowd and everything, and, saying kind of honest stuff. Like, for instance, one of her dreams as a kid that she fulfilled on this tour was having an all-female band. I knew she looked familiar, and I found out later that her guitarist was Nita Strauss, the former guitarist of Alice Cooper. I've heard her name mentioned in a lot of like shred circles and stuff. Not only could she play, but she would have made Jack Black in School of Rock really proud with how much she raise your goblet of rock.
Now raise your goblet of rock. It's a toast to those who rock.
And like swinging arm kind of rock guitar moves and jumping off a stage and kicking in the air kind of stuff. She was a total rock star. They just made Demi look, even better because they were all just totally killing it on stage. As I was hoping, but not necessarily expecting, was that she played some of her pop stuff, especially towards the end, kind of encore things, but she played them with the band, so they were, she added the rock edge to it. And I've said it for years, songs like Cool for the Summer were perfectly set up to have like an awesome breakdown. It basically has like a synth breakdown in it. Add some guitars and drums to that, you have like a full-on almost metal song, and that's exactly what she did, and I was just so happy to see that. Also, she covered a section of Ashley Simpson's La La. I actually got to see Ashley back in the day. I'll talk more about that on an upcoming episode. And she played a little bit of a Goo Goo Dolls song too. Very heart-wrenchingly, the intro speech that she gave for 29, she wishes that nobody could relate to that song. During the chorus, she let the crowd sing, and I thought it was just because they were so loud and she was just given in that moment, and I'm sure she was, but after it, she did say like she had been sick and she was apologetic about having no voice, but I couldn't tell if she was struggling because she just sounded amazing. And then for the song that they collabed on her album, The Royal and the Serpent Girl came out, and they did that one together live. And it was really cool to hear that Demi said that this was the album that she was most proud of and it's her favorite to play. And she said that it's the only one that feels like it fully represents her as an artist. I mean, I hope that that's true because this is definitely like the best output that I've ever heard from her, in my opinion. And I hope she keeps going down this road and keeps experimenting with heavier stuff. But either way, I'm just really glad that she did this and she showed the pop world. I know she's not the first to do it, but especially with how edgy and intense it is, it wasn't just like a dabble. Like, she went all in on rock, and I just wish more pop singers would do that or go back to it, like in Kelly Clarkson's case. And the last show that I got to in 2022, which was a wonderful full circle kind of thing for me because I hadn't got to see him since before the pandemic, and he was one of the first solo artists that I ever got to see, and I've had a relationship with his music for so long and got to know him as a person a little bit. It's just always nice to see Jonah Matranga, former singer of Far, New End Original, Gratitude, and a billion other projects and all of his solo stuff. But this was October 25th, 2022, at the Richmond Music Hall, which is just a little stage next to the Capitol Ale House downtown Richmond, Virginia. He had a local band that I'd never heard of before, something about pizza. I can't remember what they were called now. They were really good. They played, but then he had a couple acts touring with him, one with a full-on band, and another one was the sort of headliner of this tour was a guy from a band called Smoker Fire, which I'd never heard of before, but I'm surprised that I didn't, because they definitely have that like Midwest emo feel. Get Up Kids and Far-ish kind of stuff. But he was just doing a solo thing like Jonah. It was predictably unpredictable Jonah, as always. It was him and his guitar, and he had his backing tracks when he wanted them, but the whole show was taking recommendations. It was really disappointingly like maybe 10 people there or something. I don't understand why that is. And actually the last time that I got to see Jonah was at this same venue, and he was on the 20th anniversary of Water and Solutions from Far, and it was maybe 30 people there-ish for that. I guess maybe I have an inflated sense of how popular, at least like underground indie popular, Far and Gratitude were, but I just thought that, you know, Jonah would have at least a little bit more of a draw, because me and a couple other people that were there, you know, we were yelling out old deep cuts from his catalog, so obviously like he has fans. I'm just wondering why more weren't aware or weren't willing to come out and support him. I've seen him in situations like that before too, where he's playing at a bar in front of like just a few people, but he always plays all in, like he's playing in front of a huge crowd. He always is super honest and super connective, and you know, he's never phoning it in, and it makes you feel like he's there for you, singing to you. And I've always felt like that no matter what band he's playing with or what kind of circumstance he's playing solo or accompanied or whatever. And he really fed off that energy of those few of us that were really, you know, kind of like hardcore fans. We were just calling out stuff, and we made the whole set list, just like me and two other people. He did play a few different covers, Prince song, and he played everything as uniquely and in the moment as he always does. He often stops because he gets thoughts and he talks about something in the middle of a song, and then he'll finish the song or go on to something else. Or he'll play it in a certain way. Like sometimes if he doesn't know how to play it on the guitar, he'll just do it a cappella. And he had all the great talks and rants and reactions. And for this show, I brought my cameras and I did film it. So it's on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/breathingunderwater, if you would like to see the full performance. So those are the concerts that I went to in 2022. Look forward to probably in a year from now my 2023 concert episode, because I have so many tickets lined up for so many great shows. I'm so excited because it's such a great variety. Some repetitions from the past couple of years and some things I've never seen before. Some things I'm revisiting after many years. Really, really excited about that one. But before I wrap up this, for the featured song pick this episode, I am going to play the live audio from the show you just heard me talk about, Jonah's show. This is a song that I requested, that I've wanted to hear him play live for a long time, from one of his mid-2000s band iterations called Gratitude. It's one of my favorite songs of theirs. But I also chose this one to feature on here because it's a perfect example of why I love seeing Jonah live so much, and why I love live music so much in general, is the unpredictability and all the opportunity afforded to make it a unique experience. So you'll hear at the beginning, there's people talking really loudly in the background, and Jonah kind of chiding them. I don't think they ever realized that he was talking to them, but that kind of made it all the more funny and unique of an experience.
Any ideas? Greatest wonder? Done. I was thinking that one earlier. That's cute. I like that. I like when we're thinking that.
How about Paris so well?
Okay. Deal.
Airplanes?
Okay.
Crushing everyone.
Okay, and that is the maximum I smoked too much weed in high school can remember. So just, I got those though. I think I got them. Wait. Greatest, wear it. I heard airplanes, and there's that third one.
Crushing everyone.
That crushing pair. I thought it was that one, but I didn't know if I was just wishing that into existence. Cool. Let's do it. See what happens. Good calls. I got some oil and some matches. You are going to make a lot of terrible decisions in life, and sometimes you're going to say that too loud in a quiet room, and that will be a terrible decision you made in your life, and you'll be in a meta moment. You know I would
would do anything for you. And then you'll talk louder to try and combat the person because you just really want to make your point that you want to be heard. But all you're really doing is making some noise. I got some oil and some matches. You know I would do anything for you. So we're there for light or for ashes. All of us burn for something. The greatest risk, the greatest wonder. Some of the time we are stolen. Yeah, most of us live our lives as thieves. So how could you know that I could be trusted? How could you know that I just know that I won't leave? Always waiting for someone to be sure. And we're always just playing, and we'll be ready for the bravest wish, the going under. Yeah, the greatest risk, the greatest wonder. Yeah. You cannot give somebody joy, but you can find it by trying. And you can save someone from death, but you can love them while they're dying. You can love them while they're dying. We're always waiting for someone to be sure. And we're always just praying that we'll be ready for. Said I'm ready. So give me something pure. The bravest wish, the going under. The greatest risk, the greatest wonder. Oh, yeah, greatest risk, the greatest wonder. The greatest risk, the greatest wonder. Oh, thank you so much.
Be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1 and on Twitter and TikTok at breathingdakine. That's at breathing DAKINE. And drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted. And all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.